Hello, my name is Karen Bennett. I'm a teacher and a translator of English academic discourse based in Coimbra, and I'm also a researcher with the Centre for English Studies at the University of Lisbon, where I specialise in translation studies, particularly the transfer of knowledge across cultural and linguistic boundaries. I'm here today to talk to you about some of the problems that Portuguese scholars have when they're trying to write English academic discourse. Now, I think everyone would agree that there is an increasing need for English amongst scholars of all disciplines nowadays. Indeed, researchers are coming under increasing pressure to publish in high-impact, peer-reviewed journals, and their funding and their career advancement may directly depend upon their success with these outlets. However, English academic discourse does raise some problems for native speakers of Portuguese. For scientists, there are problems of Portuguese interference at the grammatical level, while for humanities and social science scholars, the problems are of a whole different order of magnitude, as the discourse that they use in Portuguese is completely different from English, and indeed is based on a whole different theory of knowledge. First, scholars in these disciplines have to completely restructure their material to make it acceptable to the Anglophone public. I thought that I would begin by talking something about the theory of knowledge that underpins mainstream English academic discourse, which I will hereafter abbreviate in the slides to EAD. The discourse that is used across all mainstream disciplines in English is basically empiricist in its orientation. That's to say, it asserts the existence of an extra-linguistic world that is perceived by everyone in the same way, independent of culture or language, and can therefore be observed, tested, and measured in an entirely neutral way. Concomitant with this is a philosophy of language known as linguistic realism, according to which language merely labels the things that pre-existed in the outside world. And so, in the light of this, it stands to reason that any kind of informative writing in English is expected to be as transparent as possible. That is, to offer a clear window onto the extra-linguistic reality that it is describing. From this basic assumption are derived the cardinal virtues of English academic discourse. And I am actually deliberately here using religious language because they have something of the force of the sacred in Anglophone culture. The first of these is clarity. When communicating one's message, one should aim to be as clear as possible. And this involves, amongst other things, taking account of the background knowledge of one's readers in order to choose the words that will best transmit the idea to them. Secondly, economy. This means using the minimum words necessary to transmit the message, and therefore avoiding redundancy, repetition, or unnecessary ornament. When I was a little girl at school, we were told that we should consider words to be gold coins, and that we should therefore spend only what was absolutely necessary. Now, it's clearly not easy to be both clear and economical at the same time. And this is where the third precept comes in: precision. We need to choose exactly the right word to express the meaning that we want to transmit. As George Orwell said in his 1946 essay, Politics and the English Language, what is above all needed is to let the meaning choose the word and not the other way around. So how are these qualities then manifested in practice? Well, first of all, perhaps the most important thing that the style manuals at least refer to is the need for short, simple sentences. Most of the manuals advocate sentences of no more than 40 words, using a straightforward coordinating structure rather than subordination, and with no more than one idea per clause. Because the aim is to transmit information, the meanings of words must also be tightly controlled, as there is no room at all for the kind of proliferation of meaning that you get in literary texts. So, clearly defined vocabulary is our second characteristic. In the sciences, this is not a problem, as authors will be making use of technical vocabulary that has already been established within their discipline. But in the humanities and the social sciences, which tend to use more everyday language, authors are expected to define their terms at the beginning of the text to avoid ambiguities and confusion. Now, the text also is organised in a particular way, which is recursive. At every rank of the text, and by this I mean the rank of the whole book or the whole article, the chapter, the section, the paragraph, there is a movement from the general statement of theme to an exploration of the particular ramifications of that. For example, on the first level of the paragraph, the first sentence is going to be a topic sentence, which sums up the theme of the paragraph. Then this will be illustrated or explored or contested in the sentences that follow. On the level of the book, the first chapter is the introduction that will announce the subject to be covered in the rest of the volume. Now, this passage from general to particular tends to contrast with the textual approaches that are used in Romance languages, which are more inductive. They tend to start with the detail and then build up the big picture. Now, academic texts in English are also supposed to proceed through structured rational argument supported by evidence. There are two implications of this. First of all, we are supposed to avoid abstract theorising. Given the empiricist orientation of this discourse, every claim needs to be supported by concrete evidence of a particular instance. Secondly, we are also supposed to avoid manipulating the reader through emotive or rhetorical means. However, I would like to add at this point that this is something of a myth, because, in fact, a great deal of rhetorical skill is actually required to give the illusion that the facts are speaking for themselves, as the linguist John Swales said in 1990. In the rest of this talk, then, I'm going to first of all have a look at the specific difficulties that English academic discourse raises for Portuguese speakers working in the sciences. And then in part 3, I shall go on to look at the difficulties for people working in the humanities and social sciences. And finally, as a kind of a conclusion, I shall talk something about the consequences of English as a lingua franca of academia. Before I go on, though, I'd like to just have a word about my sources. My claims about English academic discourse are drawn from the information that is given in the hundreds of style manuals that are available on the market to teach academic writing to different publics, and which I reviewed for an article published in 2009. But I also take account of the vast body of literature in the fields of descriptive and applied linguistics, which describe how expert academics actually write in practice. And these are just some examples of some of the volumes that exist on the subject, and also some of the journals which specialise in this field. As regards Portuguese scholarly discourse, however, this has not been so intensely researched. In fact, when I first got interested in the subject, about 10 years ago, there was nothing at all on it. So, my claims about Portuguese draw on my own primary research. Firstly, a corpus study of 408 academic texts of different disciplines and genres that were submitted to me for translation between 1998 and 2008. And also a survey of Portuguese researchers in the humanities and social sciences, which I conducted in 2002 and again 2008. Now, in fact, the examples that I give in the talk are drawn all from this corpus. Then the claims that I make at the end of my talk about how traditional Portuguese discourse is changing is derived from a more recent work in which I compare the 2008 corpus of history writing with a more recent one compiled in 2013, and which seems to show that the discourse is changing through influence of English.